Thank you so much for having me. I really do want to thank the organizers tonight. And thank you so much for the kind introduction, and shout out, thank you so much for all your dedication to the museum. Farshid, thank you for your leadership of the board and all the work that you guys do. The volunteers and the staff and the organizers, and Daniel, and thank you, I don't know where he went, but thank you. Can we please give them one more round of applause? You know, I ran on the premise that everyone deserves a fair shot at the American dream. I am the product of that American dream, and I know a lot of us in this room are probably the same, product of that American dream, or even came to the United States for that American dream. My parents came here in search of economic prosperity, for security, sanctuary, to give their children things that they were never afforded because of the blood running through their veins. My dad came here nearly 50 years ago when a lot of Arabs were coming to hold the door open for the next generation. And he was so early in the States, he went to Chicago first, which was kind of a mistake. Sorry, I'm just kidding. And he was an accountant by trade, and he was working for a meatpacking company, and it was Christmas, and this man comes to my dad, whose name is Muhammad, and he said, "Muhammad, do you have Christmas from where you're from?" And my dad looked at him and was like, "Yeah, we invented it." Which is true, right? It was like in our backyard. Our parents, and those who came after, they held the door open for us, right? And many of us who hold our identity markers had to walk through that door very, very early. When I was in second grade, I don't know if anyone remembers this. When I was in second grade, we had a poster of flags of the world. And I was sitting there, and I was looking at this flag, and my teacher comes over, and he says, "Which flag is yours?" And it wasn't there. So I point to the Jordanian flag. And I said, "It looks like this, but without the star." In second grade, I knew that because of my identity, I had inherited a conflict. And I knew that that would forever be the narrative of my life. I would be the person in the room being that liaison. I would be the educator. And I happily took that on, and I continue to do that. It is the biggest honor of my life to sit in that chamber, under that gold dome, and represent who we are as a people, to represent all marginalized communities, to make sure that me, as a first-generation American, as a Palestinian American, as a practicing Muslim, a woman of color, that I have my colleagues recognize, respect, honor, and uplift my identity and those people who share that lived experience. Now, what's important is that I be in these spaces, and I'm not screaming and yelling and pointing and preaching and being emotional, because let's face it, that has gotten us nowhere. And the way I make strides is leading by example, is to say, you know what, I can be a progressive Democrat and a Muslim and an Arab, and none of those things conflict with each other. I can reach across the aisle and say, hey, guess what? I fly fish just as much as the next guy. Thanks for my husband for introducing me to that. I'm pretty sure we're the only Muslims on the river fly fishing. And we're usually the only brown people, so it's good, bridging the divide. But because of those things, I also demand that my colleagues recognize those injustices. That we recognize the injustices not just for the Palestinians, but if we are going to recognize those injustices that are happening in Ukraine, they need to understand that those same things are happening in Palestine. Yeah. The same things happening in Tibet are happening in Palestine. The same things that are happening in the south of our border are happening in Palestine. And when Elijah McClain is murdered in Aurora, in my backyard, I take issue with that because he was murdered like the Palestinians are getting murdered.
Yes.
Listen, I don't think it's any secret that probably every single one of us in this room has stood and protested on some Capitol steps, in some streets, and that's okay. We need to carry that flag and we need to hold those responsible, right? We need to keep doing those things. But I also know for a long time, we've been asking ourselves, how do we influence and talk to the people who are making decisions? How can we get at that table? Because for the past 70 years, those decisions have been made for us. And we've never had a seat at the table. And that's a violation of our human rights. But I brought my own chair to the table. When I ran for office, I didn't run to be the first. I ran because no one looked like me in that building. And no one ever had. And that's a violation of our human rights. You know, there is nowhere on earth, except for this strip of land, that billions of people on this planet call holy. Where it is hallowed, sacred ground that some of the most influential people in human history have called home, have preached their message. And regardless of if you're religious or spiritual or what other thing, it doesn't matter. There is a shared humanity in their one message of peace. And I know that can sound so trite and cliche and, let's come together and kumbaya. But there is a shared humanity in that. And one of the biggest examples of that shared humanity was when I was teaching at the University of Denver. I was teaching life under occupation from a Palestinian perspective. And I got to my Gaza unit, and this was right after one of the trillion, attacks on Gaza, when the 3 little boys were murdered on the beach. You guys remember this?
Yep.
Okay. Now, for anyone who's also watched Adobe TV, we know nothing is censored and nothing is blurred out, and so you see a lot of it. It's really graphic. And I brought this to my class. And I gave them fair warning. I said, listen, there are 75 of you in this class. None of this is censored. None of this is blurred. And if you feel like you need to leave now, I completely understand. And they didn't leave. I showed them the footage. I showed them the Norwegian doctor holding up the baby with his brains hanging out, right? Pleading for the world to name the injustice. And this woman raises her hand in my class and she says, I don't believe you. There was a man sitting in the front and he raises his hand. And he stood up and he said, I am a doctor with Doctors Without Borders. And I was in Gaza during this incursion and I can vouch for what she's saying. And only in that moment, I had credibility and legitimacy. My expertise, my lived experiences, my degrees, nothing mattered. I was the brown, emotional girl in front of the class. And that's why we need a seat at the table. We're here tonight for that shared humanity. Last time I was in DC, my husband and I, we were very adamant. We will not leave DC until we visited the museum. And yes, that applause is for the museum. And the first thing I noticed when I walked up was the banners in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Now, when I came in as the only Muslim and only Arab, I didn't have a caucus to join, right? So the Black Caucus adopted me, right? And they adopted me because of that unfortunate shared kinship, right? Second-class citizens, denied the right to vote, pick your poison, right? And when I saw that, it almost validated what we were doing on the state level in Colorado, recognizing very publicly and being very unapologetic as the Black Caucus to say, you know what? We are going to point out the injustice. We are going to say Palestinians matter, and we are going to say that they should be included. And that's what they did. And having that banner outside the museum advertised to the entire world that we are also unapologetic about it. You know, when I walked into the museum with my husband, we were excited. We didn't know, honestly, what to expect. I have to be honest with you. I didn't know how big it was, how small. I didn't know anything. And we walk in, and Mohammed so graciously allowed us to join his tour. And, you know, we were incredibly moved, and we were just, you know, honestly awestrucken. And as many times as I have led Americans to the Middle East, and I have been so proud to show off where I'm from, it's a lot different when you see it memorialized, right? In such a formal fashion. And we left inspired and rejuvenated. And we left ready to get back to work, right? And we left ready to fight for injustice, against injustice, right? I will end with this. The reason Palestinians are making strides in this country is because of things like MPP.
Yes.
I know for decades, growing up in this country, I have looked at other protected classes and seen their heritage and history protected and honored with monuments. And we never had anything. And that changed. That changed in the heart of this country's capital, and you made it possible. You gave us our monument. The museum and all of us around the country who are unapologetic about our allyship, about our heritage, right, about who we are, we will now demand that people say where we are from. They will name Lifta. Sorry. They will name Deir Yassin, they will name Colonia, they will name Tabariya, and we will demand it. We will demand it because we will demand that they honor, respect, recognize, and elevate our heritage, our history, our home, our ancestors, and our story. But most of all, we will demand that they say the names of all the villages erased off that map, but not our hearts. My husband is a combat interpreter, and he's from Iraq. And you know, when I tell that story of that little girl looking at that flag, I'm getting to you in a minute, honey. Just 1 second. A few years later, I was giving a speech to a very progressive group of Democratic women. And when I told that story, a woman in the front raised her hand. There's always someone in the front in my stories. She raised her hand and she said, well, why didn't you point to the American flag? And I was so flustered, I got so angry that I answered the question and I said, you know what? I'm honored to be an American. I'm honored to carry that passport, right? But when you also hold an identity marker like being a Palestinian, when you know your existence is threatened, yeah, I'm gonna stand up for it and I'm gonna say I'm Palestinian American. But I was so upset that on my way home, I missed my exit twice. And I was crying. I was crying because in that moment, just like that woman did in my class, she questioned my Americanness. I have run for office. I have been democratically elected. I have raised my right hand and took an oath to defend our highest document in our land. My brother is a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. My husband, now it's your turn. My husband was a combat interpreter for our troops. He risked his life in Iraq. My father was a Muslim chaplain for the Air Force. None of it mattered. It didn't matter. I was not American enough because I couldn't point to my flag. The museum is here so that next little girl won't ever, she won't ever have to point to the Jordanian flag. Thank you.
Thank you, River.